Emily, thank you so much for being on the Surf Strong Show. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So where are you right now? Where are you recording from?
I live in Carbondale, Colorado. So we're about 3.5 hours from Denver and the Front Range. We're on the western side. So all of our water flows to you guys in California. Yeah.
We'll try and take shorter showers. That's
Thank
my
you.
pledge to you.
Well, it doesn't bother us at the headwaters, right? We've got to
Right.
take care of you guys better, actually.
So for you personally out in that, like where do you get your movement outside? Is it snow during the winter? Is it hiking? Like I know you have some river background, which we'll get into. Like
Mhm.
how do you enjoy nature where you are in Colorado?
Oh man, all of it. All of it. I mean, this year I broke my distal fib, so my ankle, and I tore up my knee. So my ski season was cut short, and I'm really noticing how my outdoor life is such an anchor point for my health, my mental health, my mood, because that's been my doorway since really my whole life, but especially in my 20s. I live to ski. I love to skin and ski, back country when I can, but even front side skinning up. Love to bow hunt and hike all fall, all summer, scouting for animals, getting off trail and using navigation and using all of my senses to find animals. And I love to kayak, love to be on the rivers. So that's a huge part of my relationship to this place.
I want to circle back to what you just said right there for those that don't really familiar, and I don't have a huge background in it, but skinning is on skis, trekking up, taking the skins off to then be skiing down wherever you've trekked to. Is that right?
Yeah, they're brilliant. They used to be actual skins, and the fur would slide uphill and then catch downhill, like the direction of the fur. And so now we have these fancy actual synthetic skins with special glue that are cut right to your skis with special alpine touring or telemark bindings. And it's really comfortable, lightweight gear that you can hike. What I love about it is you don't have to really focus down as much.
Yeah.
You on the snow, you're gliding and setting a trail or following someone's trail, and you can really look up and be in the environment in a different way. And then you get
As
to ski
opposed to
down.
like downhilling where you're really paying attention to what's happening within the terrain and everything, so your vision kind of comes down a little bit closer.
Maybe I'm thinking more like in the summer when I'm hiking uphill and I've got to pay attention to roots and rocks and
Yeah.
trees that are down, especially off trail. But when you're skinning on snow, you have this blanket of white and you can get into this rhythm with the mountain. It's amazing. And I know you've got surfers that listen to this. I imagine it's that any kind of water, frozen, any form of water, snow, ice, or actual water, or even steam, to me is like a privilege to get to interact with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to be said too about we've talked about this on the show before on other episodes where I think something about seeing horizon lines too in distance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you just would like jump to your forefront of your thoughts on like what you're missing or what's not benefiting you. But obviously we're recording this on screens and sometimes we'll have something that's like the perception of depth, but it really doesn't give you that.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does or doesn't do towards the way your senses are. I know when I'm surfing, whenever I'm out and I'm really looking out at the horizon line, like I just know that that is giving me something. And it's all those things together. You're right. Large bodies of water, just being part of something larger. And then that distance horizon, I think, is something. And like you're saying, looking down into something and just being able to open up, it just gives you
Yeah,
something intangible almost.
totally. And yet it's so biologically wired. And the way we're now living with horizon lines obstructed by cities and skyscrapers and moving ourselves across the country. I just drove from California back home. I was in Cali last week, and look, I moved my body thousands of miles without moving my body. I just sat there in a
Yeah.
car. And the one thing I do love about driving is the horizon.
Yeah.
it's a chance to soften your gaze and kind of just be in a different zone than day to day life. But you just nailed it with like the ocean horizon last week when I was there. I just was astounded by the power of the ocean because I'm a landlocked girl. So it really impacts me. You guys
Yeah.
are really blessed.
Yeah. No, I don't. I always am trying to remind myself, even on the small level, like surfing takes me there, right? I don't have to think
Mhm.
about it. I don't have to motivate myself to do it. I'm there. Like if I get any opportunity to surf, I'm going to do it. But there's times, of course, where blown out, you can't do this, and then I'll go like, wow, I haven't even walked on the beach in a week. And it's
Really?
it's it's literally right there. You have to be very cognizant about that because, like anything
Mhm.
else, you get into your rhythms, and so surfing is what motivates me. So, oh, I'm doing it consistently. Okay, now I have to go do these other responsibilities that I have, and so there's no surf. So, oh, I'm going to take care of this, and then you stop and you go, no, no, no. This is not only is it a privilege, it almost feels like a responsibility. Like it's 2 blocks from my house. You need to get down there
Yes.
every day.
Yeah, it's easy to take what we have for granted in the environment. I feel that way in the mountains, and I'm a wannabe ocean surfer. I've spent a lot of time surfing in the ocean, but it's not like a part-time sport, I've learned. And what a friend of mine who surfs a lot highlighted for me is that when you're surfing on the ocean, this is obvious to all of you guys, but you're moving with the wave.
Yeah.
And I surf a lot on rivers. And
Ah,
so when I'm surfing in my kayak on a river wave, it's like you're surfing uphill. It's coming at you the whole
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And there can be logs coming down if it's like a huge spring runoff. There can be ducks, there can be other people, rafts, paddles, shrapnel from upriver. And you are surfing uphill, responding all the time.
Huh.
So the last time I got to surf was actually in California with our good friend Danny Nichols, who runs Operation Open Water.
Oh yeah, I
And
know Danny. When he was still involved with Operation Surf, we've done a lot of events together. Yeah, he's a
oh,
great guy.
nice. I
Yeah,
love Danny.
yeah.
Yeah, I forced him. I'm like, you are taking me surfing. And
Right,
I
and not
think
to force him
it's,
very hard,
no,
to get us in the water is not too difficult.
yeah, I asked the right buddy, to get this Colorado girl on the water, but I think it was Danny that was like, yeah, you just have to kind of shift your
Yeah,
orientation to the horizon as you're surfing. When you're standing, you're moving with this wave.
yeah.
And that's not a small thing to me. I really sensed that change in my orientation, and it helps me so much in the ocean. Like, oh,
Even
I can
within
just,
like your balance and your stability and the way you were responding to the energy, even in that way.
absolutely. It's different. And here we have a lot of actual board surfers that will ride our spring runoff. We have a standing 20-foot wave here,
Yeah,
and it'll come up, but it's short lived.
yeah,
It's not like a swell, it's like spring runoff. And when the snow melts, it's done. And so people travel from all over and come to this wave. And we've got short boarders, long boarders. River right has like a sweet longboard wave, and river left becomes like a gnarly pile. And
wow,
it's a cool feature, and it changes based on the sunshine. Like if the sun comes out that day, more water's coming, and you'll watch it over the hour, the wave will change. And these guys that ride it, I can just see when I watch ocean surfers on the ocean, there's this like you're moving with it and you're responding in time with the wave that you're on. On the river, it's a very nimble, quick thing because it
yeah,
can change like that. It can surge. You don't have that sense of like rolling with a wave that's
yeah,
surging. It can just suddenly get a bump and just slam you.
yeah.
So yeah, it's super fun. Maybe there's some river surfers listening.
Well, I can relate to that in the opposing. When we went, I was on a trip to Germany and we were in Munich, and I was like, well, I'm gonna go check out this river wave for sure. So I was like, I brought I think I brought like my booties and my hood or something with me because I'm like, well, I can't take my full wetsuit with me. That's too much. And I went down, and then they have like a surf shop in Munich specifically for that river wave, and it's pretty much right in Munich. And
Wild.
enough to where like I rented a board and rented a suit and like was on
Yay.
their version of the subway with my board.
Oh, wow. That is awesome.
It was
That's
really awesome. I was like, I'm
dedication.
gonna make this happen. And I was with my dad and my sister, and they're like, when are you going? Like, okay, well, yeah, we'll do it. We'll go see you do it. And then I was like, okay, I got to go now because it's this window. Blah blah blah. Like, long story short, they're like, we'll meet you there. So I'm like, I took a picture of me on the subway. I'm like, I gotta get a picture of this. And I got down there, and it was the same thing. It was like a flow. Like somebody walked up to me, started speaking in German. I was like, I'm sorry, I don't speak German. And they were like, well, are you gonna, of course they speak English, the arrogance of
Yeah.
us. I'm like, I'm sorry. In my terrible German, I was like, I'm sorry, I don't speak German. And he's like, I'm like, oh, are you gonna ride it? And he's like, and he was about my height, maybe a little taller. And he said, no, it's the flow isn't enough for me. Like you'll be able to do it, but it's going to be hard. And you're
Mm,
exactly right. Like that was so difficult. Like I stood up, thank goodness I stood up, but it was
yeah.
so difficult because part of it was the flow. It was like,
Hmm.
I'm bigger. So it was like just trying to do it. And then you're right though. Like my natural response to like be cutting through the water and making a turn and the inertia of what you're doing, you don't have any of that.
No.
You're just responding to the water, and it's totally doot, 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 doot. It's like
Yeah.
that. And
Micro adjustments make a huge difference
I was
depending on the
laughing.
time
I
of
was
the
laughing at
flow.
myself. It was so fun. And then of course, like I'm watching like these other people that ride it all the time. And
Yeah.
there was this one woman, she was I couldn't really tell how old she was. She was probably in her early 20s. She was ripping that wave. It
Oh,
was
I
so
love it.
I probably stood and watched her. Like there wasn't too many people so they could cycle through. I probably watched that woman ride that wave like 4 or 5 times, and I could not believe how much she could cut back on that. After
Mm,
I'd just done it, I'm like, I don't know how she's doing that. Like it was great. And I also asked them, I was like, how many of you, there was like maybe 6 or 7 of them, how many of you have surfed in the ocean? And only one of them had ever
you're
surfed an ocean wave.
kidding. Really? That
Yeah.
shows a lot about river surfing and how far it's come. That's wild. These play
And it's
parts of the
probably
world.
it probably was that, because I would imagine like
Geography.
if you're doing that, like Europeans travel. I would imagine that's probably an anomaly that only
Yeah.
one had done it, but yeah, it's like, hey, you ride what's near you.
Yeah, that's right, for sure.
So tell me more about your river experience. Like, how did you get exposed to, kayaking, and did you do whitewater rafting guiding? Like, tell me like a little bit of your history within that.
Well, did a family river trip with my mom and my brother. Commercial trip, was given the full wetsuit and the safety talk, and was the asking all the touristy questions. I was 15 years old. How deep is the river? Chest high on a duck. All these things that just was really new. I'd grown up fly fishing with my dad and going to the mountains and being on rivers a lot, but I had friends that were my age, 15, 16-year-old kids that were river guiding, 3 boys that we went to high school with that were just these Colorado mountain kids. And they were influencers for me because I fell in love that day with the whole experience of being moved downriver. We flipped, we swam, it was exhilarating, we were fine. But just that force of not just standing fly fishing on the water, but being immersed in the column of water. I'm
Mhm.
so glad we swam and flipped that day because, it really was a powerful experience. And so that next summer, I linked up with those friends that were living on the river, and I spent like 2 weeks just paddling, and then decided to become a river guide. So a bunch of my other friends did the same. It's a Colorado thing, we just naturally have access to these resources, and some of us actually take advantage of that, which I'm lucky I had friends to influence me. Um, but for me, the relationship to water and kayaking was, it, no kidding, like saved me. I was an at-risk teenager, went through a ton of trauma between the age of 9 and 16, and through the river, I just felt like I met people who were living a different lifestyle that felt real. It was like stripped away a lot of the bullshit. Everybody was connected to something bigger. Not that we were naming it that, we just are. You're taking these wonderful risks every day. The river doesn't care about you in a great way, just like the ocean doesn't care about you, but you're part of it. So you have to take responsibility for yourself in that environment and choose who you're learning with and doing it with. And I had great friends that passed that torch on. And so, long story short, it took me years to get a role in my kayak. That was back in the days when if you saw a kayak on another truck, you would pull over and talk to each other. No, there were not many whitewater kayakers, but we'd go after work and get into trouble and swim and chase deer and laugh and have beers under the stars that night, rinse, repeat, guide the next day, and then boat after work, long summer nights. But I ended up guiding in California in long ago, 1998, to date myself. I just turned 50. And that year was the 100-year flood. They closed all the commercial boating for weeks because the rivers were too high. They were too dangerous. And that was the summer that I cut my teeth and like got my role. And it was really a defining summer of like, you're either going to do this. And I didn't have all my safety people that I usually paddled with that kind of held me at a certain level. And so that was my break free summer. And I continued to get a certification to teach whitewater kayaking and spent about 10 years teaching and traveling and paddling a lot.
It's very much a another distinct subculture, right? Like when you get together, I mean, you could say that about surfing on some level. It's all grown, of course, but I imagine during that time, like you're traveling to a different place and maybe you're working professionally, like you're coming across a lot of the same people, right? So you're reinforcing connection, the connection to the river and to water, to this community. And that's just, I mean, it's powerful, of course. And it's also, to circle back to what you said before too, is there's something about that idea of nature for sure, but water specifically, that you are part of this thing and it has zero regard for you.
Mm-hmm.
That there's something very empowering about that, which seems almost counter intuitive to somebody that hasn't experienced that before. But it really is that feeling of like, oh, I have to internalize this. This is about what I'm doing and the actions I'm taking, whether it's preparation within an actual event of something, what I'm thinking about it after. I have to process this and to be able to be prepared to be part of this thing that is much larger than me, will always be more powerful than me,
Yep.
and doesn't care about me at all.
Yes, that's it right there. It does not care in the best way.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
going to hold your hand and give you a medal for trying. And you get taught really quickly by water that it always changes too. So
Yes.
it teaches fluidity. It teaches presence. It teaches reward through real risk and
Yeah.
that wonderful flow state that's only available when there's something real. When skill meets a little bit of risk and a lot of presence, and you're right at the edge of your capacity. I mean, there's nothing better for our experience of this one precious life than having access to a doorway to that.
Yes.
So for all you guys that are surfing in the ocean, like I mean, I have so much respect for the ocean. And I've learned that before I go on into the river or into the ocean, I always touch the water, thank the water.
Yeah.
I sit and I watch what's happening for a while before I get in
Yeah.
because it's not the same if even if I surfed that morning or paddled that morning, it's not the same body of water right now. So it's infinitely powerful that way.
And that is this is a theme that comes back, of course, over and over and over again when I have these conversations, because it is that universal piece, which is, it almost, saying being present almost doesn't do it justice. It's like you absolutely have to stop. You have to
Mm-hmm.
stop and really evaluate where you are. What am I bringing to this that's both positive and, like you said, skill set, preparation, and what am I bringing to this that is going to be counterproductive to what I'm trying to achieve, which is to be part of this energy and to experience it, and so I guess somewhat do it justice and at the same time, make sure that I stay safe and everybody around me stays safe. It
Yeah,
presence doesn't convey that.
it doesn't really. Yep. It's a good
But you're
call.
right, though. You have to stop and you have to really evaluate. I had this experience just recently, and it's happened several times before. But I had something. It was a business thing, and it was a schedule thing, and they had to reschedule. And so, oh, it was like, okay, this window opened up, and then I was like, okay, well, I should maybe go do this. And I was like, well, let's go. Let me go check the surf. And I went and checked the surf, and it was like, okay, I got a small window right here because I have something else to do. And I went out and went surfing, but I didn't do that check. I didn't do
Hmm.
that check in. And I was in that mode. I was in my head, I was still in my business and the responsibilities I had to take care of that. So when I was out there, I was like going through this filter. I wasn't even recognizing that it was happening.
Yep.
And I
That's
I
amazing.
got a wave and fell, and it's like I'd never surfed before, and I was like, okay, you either focus right now. You're either going to continue to do this right now, be here, or you need to get out. And I
Yes.
tried a wave or two, and I was like, nope, I got to get out. And that
Good.
really
Yeah.
bummed me out.
Yeah. It is an instant humble pie that you take a bite of every time that that happens. And I love that experience just because
Yeah.
you just brought forward how easy it is in most of the things that we're engaged in modern life to not have that reality check. The rules still apply. If we're
Yeah.
thinking about something else while we're doing one thing, we're actually not doing anything and we're not present with what
Yes.
we're doing. But we don't have something raw, powerful, and real to check that, except our long term health, which is really hard to see in the face
Yeah.
of dopamine and addiction and desires and patterns. It's really hard to check the constant busyness and instant gratification dopamine cycles in when you have something like surfing or the river or skiing that's a raw natural power that is going to kick your ass if you are multitasking or you think you're multitasking. It's beyond presence, it's physiology. You're training the physiological state of paying real attention, and it's a felt sense, it's a practice that water demands. So when you have that, it's a training tool that absolutely translates to the rest of your life, because you get at the very least you get an understanding of how shitty it feels to try to do 10 things at once and
Yeah.
not be anywhere at once.
Yeah. Yeah. That real time feedback of like something as simple as blowing a wave or really just getting smacked down.
Yeah,
You can't hide from it. It's not, and you can't place blame anywhere.
exactly.
That
That's the
essence right
thing. I
there.
love that. Yep.
You're like looking around like, who am I blaming? Like, oh, there's nobody here but me.
Yeah. And look, if you do your humility moment and you thank the water, whatever your practice is, I'm sure surfers are just as superstitious, some of you, as I am. You got to thank nature for a moment. You do all that quote right, and you still get your ass handed to you and you get trashed. At least you were in choice around it and you
Yeah.
were conscious. And it's just a different experience than most of the things we get.
Yes.
It's not like
No, I
tennis.
love that. I love that. When you do that check in, you're right. It's still going to happen, but
Hmm.
your experience of that moment is different because
Hmm.
it's like, okay, there was a lesson here that I needed to learn, and I did everything I could do, or better said, did I do everything that I could do to make sure that my skills were ready for this, make sure that my mind was straight and ready for this? And if you are able to honestly say yes, then you go, okay, there's a lesson in here that I needed to learn and carry with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not blame, it's just um, progress. It's
Yeah.
just allowing yourself to be open to continually learning and not looking for why necessarily.
Well, and how about talking about the fact that maybe there's nothing to learn? You actually just got your ass kicked and you had the experience fully of that.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're asking for when we dance with water. We're saying, I understand where I fit on this scale. And the thing that I've observed is that things can go wrong in class 2 rivers, things can go wrong on 2-foot days. And sometimes we do everything, quote, right, but you're still going to have this experience that smacks you into present time reality. And there is no lesson. And like you said, there is no blame. You just finally are living. You're living a full life that includes pain. that's part of what we're saying with the risk piece is like, and there's an ego piece to that too. Like if you're attached to the performance and all that, you're going to get out of that physiological presence and that deeper experience of reality.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that. That's something that's really interesting that I would have to say, like, I think I understand this in an intellectual level, but as far as experience or really being having some training with it is a little bit less. Where you basically you've said like we're getting attached to the outcome and we lose touch with the process. Just talk a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
about that.
Well, I have the fortune to get to be business partners with Brian McKenzie. And I know you just had him on the podcast, and maybe you guys touched on some of this. I'm excited to take a listen. But one of the things that we have really evolved in our work together and that he's taught me so much about too is this attachment piece and how that impacts performance. You know, Brian works with very elite athletes from all over the place. And I'm working with more now that I'm a part of Shift with him, and I help out with rapid optimization with Dr. Andy Galpin and Dan Garner's team. And so I'm meeting more professional level athletes and elite athletes. And what I'm observing that relates to the work I do with trauma is that when we are, for very valid reasons, attached to an outcome, the way that we train changes. The decisions we make when we're engaged in our sport are now rooted in outcome instead of the process. And that can deprive us of real learning and real high levels of performance. And the people who have had the best experiences, the gold medals, the podiums, etc., they no longer have that underdog energy of I've got nothing to lose. Now there's an ego attachment of this is who I am, this is my identity. And all these people care, which nobody does. But we like to think that everybody's judging us and we have something to prove. A lot of the work that I do around neurophysiology is helping people identify what signals of threat are coming through the nervous system when your attachment is activated, and start to learn how does that change your cognitive process, your motor skills. Because if you're attached, you lose agility, you lose nimbleness, you lose the ability to respond authentically. And that, so it goes beyond just like attachment to outcome, and it starts to impact the way you think, feel, and behave. And then however you perform, let's say that you win and you have a great performance somehow, despite all that threat response going on and anxiety, you just reinforced how important it is to win the next time. If you lose, you just reinforced how terrible it feels because you were so attached to the outcome instead of the learning. And you're not going to learn anything from how it went, which is really valuable because being in the process is where the joy and the actual feeling of connection comes from that we lose when we're attached.
So an understanding of that, how those connections work, what are some, and this might be a larger question that can really be answered in just a few points. What are some practical applications of practice of that? And again, maybe from more of the recreational athlete.
Mm-hmm.
We still have these things of like performance and looking around and I don't want to fall on this wave because of this. Those are all very similar. Gold
Sure.
medal or falling on a wave amongst my peers, probably
Yeah.
has the same responses. What are some of the practical approaches that we can do to empower ourselves to remain in the process and
Mm-hmm.
detach from the outcome?
There's so much there to discover and talk about because this goes into technique and skill building. Like if you're building a skill, how do we learn? The best learning happens in a creative process where there's non-attachment, where you can fail because failure is not failure. It's actually something called learning. It's how you test in that real element with sports. about balance and movement and eye focus, all of it, right? So to develop skill, it's important to have an environment where there's creativity and joy. And I think community is a part of that, you know, having friends that laugh with you when you eat shit and things go wrong, and reinforcing that, like, this is fun, this isn't
Yeah.
super serious. And then there's a piece of learning and reinforcing that requires participation with the nervous system. So we learn things 15 times faster if we stop after training a new skill and spend 10 to 15 minutes visualizing what went right and how to repeat it well. So for higher level athletes or people who are really engaged in skill development, even for healing, for like vestibular healing or anything, just understanding the way our brains and bodies learn is through play, creativity, and then rest. Down regulating and imprinting on the nervous system. Look, what you just learned, I'm going to take the time to hit save and kind of defrag the noise of what wasn't valuable and consolidate and file away the information that we want to turn into knowledge. And that requires a reset of the nervous system. So whatever skill you're learning, could be any sport, jujitsu, golf, tennis, surfing, you go and you practice a skill, take that 10 to 15 minutes to soften your eyes, extend your exhales, visualize what you loved about it, what was working, play some mini movies of running through a specific part of the technique that you're wanting to encode, and you'll learn it 15 times faster.
Yeah, that's amazing. In that sequence that you just said right there, where you said a term that really kind of stuck to me, which is down regulating. What do you mean by that?
Well, upregulating the sympathetic nervous system is activating our fight or flight response. And when we feel threatened, the survival brain, the brainstem, and the limbic systems come online to create sympathetic stress that creates arousal. And in that state, we can do a lot with fight or flight to help ourselves survive, but it does shut off some of the more parasympathetic connections around fine and gross motor skill, broad visual field, recruiting new learned skills. Those will go offline in favor of old patterns. So when you're activated by a threat response from something like performance anxiety, or you decided that sleep isn't really that important and you can eat whatever you want 5 days before, you know, your physiology, your body is the instrument through which these stress responses live. And so managing your physiology and your health gives you a more finely tuned instrument. If you can read sympathetic activation, then you can down regulate to deactivate some of the fight or flight tension. And when you upregulate the parasympathetic, so upregulation can happen in both. So it used to be taught just as like parasympathetic is the brakes. We don't love that because it implies that it's stopping something, when in reality, the parasympathetic system has tons of dynamic actions in the body that are associated with the things I just mentioned, with motor skill, cognition, memory recruitment, learning, new decision making, rationalization, logic. So when you deactivate fight or flight and the threat systems get dampened, and we bring on more vagus nerve tone, more parasympathetic activity, now we are in a totally different state, and the higher brain is wired more into the system. We can access the prefrontal cortex, our decision making, the motor function, motor cortexes. So downregulation is something that's missed a lot in training and performance, and it's used on the fly when you read anxiety or attachment. And it's also really important to train that when you don't need it, so that it's a skill that you've bookmarked in your nervous system. You know what it feels like to do it.
Oh, that's great. And I really love in there that one line where you basically just said, take that time to hit save. Like, what do you want to learn from this positive action that you just have? We'll just use surfing. you did something, whether it was a maneuver or a drop or something that really resonated, like stop, relive that, and save that so you can
Hmm.
call back to it. What was that positive thing? I don't think we do that enough. Like, just in the practical terms, like within clients that I work with, I'm like, you need to celebrate your wins. What we've talked about here for the last 15 minutes is all the things you think are going wrong. And
Yeah.
we need to focus on those, of course, and we need to give some resolution and some solutions for that. But how about this list of things right here that are going so great? You need to celebrate these things. You
Yes.
can't just always be focusing on what you feel is not bringing you towards your goals. Like, focus also on the things that are taking you closer to that step. I think that's just a human nature response, which is, again, you could go back to the fight and flight part, like what's wrong? I need to make sure that I
Hmm.
reduce my risk, and in my case, in this thing, like, I need to conserve calories. Like, that's what I tell
Hmm.
clients all the time. Like, these are the two things that your primal brain is really focused on in this realm, which is
Yes. Yeah.
conserve calories and reduce risk. That's it. It wants you to sit on that couch and
Hmm.
eat sugar, salt, and fat. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not willpower, it's biology. And the
Yeah.
more dysregulated you are, the more those survival patterns kick in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that piece of your coaching because like I'm just laughing thinking about one of the times I was surfing in Hawaii and my friend noticed that I kept I'm goofy and I kept dragging my inside foot and it was a subconscious paddling thing. It was like I'm like creating a rudder. And so I couldn't
You
even
had another fin.
I had another fin. It was like this instinct as I'm dropping in, I would like drag to set the board the way I wanted
Oh,
it
I'm
to
supposed to.
go.
I want to turn that way. Oh,
Yeah.
I gotta.
So drag. And it took me a long time to repattern that. It was so deeply ingrained. And um, but the play and the creativity and the laughter. And then I would sit on the beach and I would watch these amazing. We had a great swell come in, way too big for me to be out there. And I just was like, I am going to watch
Yeah.
and learn because now I have the sensation of the couple times I did it, quote, right, where I felt like, oh, I dropped in and I caught the glass instead of the foamy,
Yeah.
bubbly, I actually caught the wave. I'm going to study that. And you can learn so much through the visual cortex if you're, like you said, focusing on the positive,
Yeah.
reinforcing a piece that you just got, one piece at a time. Oh, I'm going to work on this and I'm going to just soak it in visually. And then I can't wait to go practice it. You build that momentum and stoke for your play.
Yeah.
And then you get to surf again instead of, oh, I'm not doing it right. And I can't figure this, the negative bias in our brain can just really ruin some of these sports
Yeah.
because
And I
of
think it's
that.
important, like you said, for all of us to give ourselves some grace, which is, this is biology and evolution, and is not about willpower. That
Yeah.
doesn't let you off the hook. Like, again, it's up to you. You have to create patterns and reinforce those positive patterns to reach closer to the goals that you've set for yourself. But at the same time, understand, like, you're not going to learn this and then have it. Those things are still going to come back to that. Again, in my term, when I say to clients, I simplified. It's like, conserve calories and reduce risk. That's never going to go away.
Hmm.
So once you can recognize that that's happening, and you're creating patterns that are going to positively influence the choices you're making in the present, you will, and you're choosing positive way more often than having that negative influence in it, you're going to win more often. And
Yeah.
again, win's probably the wrong word. It's not about winning and losing. It's just about moving towards growth and positive progression.
Hmm.
And the other thing too that we're so fortunate for, like the clients, I only work with surfers now, and that part of it, we have at the center of how we self-identify is, whether we're a surfer or a skier, at the center of us, what drives us is still movement. And to
Yes.
have that at the center is
Yeah.
really, really a powerful gift, because without that, I think I would self-reflect back on my life and different times and different things where maybe it pulled me away from the ocean a little bit more just because life and what, like, it still was, everything was driving me back to movement. And if you don't have that in your life, what we're describing and keeping ourselves moving is so much more difficult.
Everything is harder when we're not moving, and we're wired to move so much. And again, Brian's really diving into this in his work with walking and just low intensity movement. But a cool story from last week at Laguna Beach is that I took my day off between working with Laguna Beach Police Department to do some skill of stress training. And I went out with Danny Nichols' group with Open Water, and we did an open outrigger, like a team canoe. And
Uh,
so we did the hut ho, team canoe thing, which I've done every time I'm out there with them. I try to get in and paddle. And it was with a first responder wellness group, actually inpatient first responders, just getting support for PTSD and complex trauma issues. And what I wanted to share about that was that I've got this leg injury, and it's taking a while to heal because I didn't have surgery. So I've got ligaments like that keep my kneecap on, and like all around the ACL tore. Anyway, the ankle broke. It's taking a while to walk smoothly. And it's been 9 weeks. So some of the limping and pain is now just an encoded pathway. It's an efficient pathway that my brain has figured out. So when I'm depleted and haven't been moving very much, I feel more pain. Yes, there's tissue issues and damage that's still being repaired, but that pain signaling is just related to a threat response. So what I noticed is I went out on Wednesday and I did a couple hours paddling in union with these amazing first responders. And we didn't talk. There was no talk therapy or cognitive. We just hut, ho, switched and paddled and did that for hours. And we came back in. When I first came out, I was limping pretty badly from being on my foot the day before all day teaching. I got out of the boat where I did no therapy for my leg. In fact, it was way below my heart, shoved down in this canoe, just usually it would be just swollen. I came out and I just walked normally pretty much. Like I walked normally the rest of the night. I didn't feel pain at all that night. And I wanted to share that because for me, it was the water, the ocean, the paddle, and how paddle movement impacted my systemic pain and inflammation response. It helped my whole lower leg feel great. And I did no acute therapy on my leg at all. So,
do you think it was even more powerful for you because it connected back to all of your earlier paddle experience and repetition within that to even resonate more deeply with you in that place?
oh, I'm sure. I mean,
Yeah.
that you probably feel the same way, just getting out on water.
Yeah.
Just being out on water, it gives you something that's intangible, and it is a relationship, just like breath. The more you consciously breathe, the more that tool becomes you. And if you consciously go out and paddle and surf, you have a dynamic relationship with water that's different from the average person.
Yeah.
And you can recall that mentally, but man, every chance you get to go out and be in that environment, it's like you get to pick up where you left off. It's
Yeah.
a relationship. It's not this like linear thing of like I paddled for this length, and no, you go out and it's connection
Yeah.
instantly.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is hard to put into words what that is, but you know it instantly. And you might even not recognize that that part of your battery needs to be charged. And like I've made this joke so many times, but I always come back to it. Like my wife will say, "You need to go paddle." I'll be like, it's blown out, and she's like, "You need to go paddle." And it happens numerous times, and she's right. And why I bring that up so many times is because she can see it, and
Mm-hmm.
first person I can't, even though I know it. I know it I know it intellectually. That's not right. I know it inherently,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't see it because I'm just in this mode.
Yes.
And a little bit of distance, but still somebody that's obviously very close in my life and she can see you need this, you need to go do this right now. And just to have that, just to be able to have that when things are happening in life and all of this is coming at us, and like I say, life keeps lifing at us, we know that's where we have to go. And
Mm-hmm.
again, that's the gift. Like, I know I can go do this and everything's going to be better. Life isn't going to be solved and it's not going to stop coming at me, but I will be in such a clear place to be able to respond to that in a positive, beneficial way,
Mm-hmm.
to not continually internalize whatever this stimulus is coming at me. It's just like, okay, I can stop this for 30 minutes and I can go do that and I'm going to feel better. Oh my gosh. Like,
Can you
you want
imagine not having?
everybody to have that in their life,
Yeah,
whatever that is.
yeah, whatever that is. I mean, it is something that is hard to put your finger on, but when you're really dysregulated, it's its own entropy kind of, we
Yeah.
start to create from that state. And so a lot of what I do in my work is teach people to read that state without moral judgment. Because when we feel anxious or overwhelmed, those bodily sensations and that threat response, our natural inclination is to try to do more to get the to-do list done and try to clear the stress out of our life.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, if we can just push pause and do something to reconnect and replenish and recruit more of that parasympathetic, whole brain body connection, then you solve your problems from a place of connection and time dilates. You don't have this I have to mode. Half the crap that you think was so important dissolves. It's just a totally game-changing way to live, but it takes training. It takes
Yeah.
support to sometimes let go of the self-harm that we do and the identity we create. I mean, how many people just love, I'm talking with a client about this right now who's ready to retire and has plenty of resources to do so. But the conditioned fear of what do you do for a living?
Yeah.
It's like practice, just instead of answering that with I'm busy, I have projects, I'm doing this. What if our response to that was like, I'm really reconnecting to surfing right now? So
Yeah.
what? You could still be a high powered lawyer. You could still go have all of that. But what if our response was around what we're enjoying, not who we are based on our jobs or how busy and accomplished we are? But I'm learning to cut back on the wave. I'm exploring this new beach I'm not going to tell you about. I've got a secret spot right now that's just where I'm spending all my time, whatever, just
Yeah.
shaking up this very, very systemic anxiety going on that I'm
Yeah.
noticing culturally.
Because that response that you're saying right there, I'm really reconnecting to surfing, is completely internal to them. The response from the person they're talking to, it has zero connection to that. The I'm a high powered lawyer is how they're self-identifying, but that's also connected to what that's conveying to you about me and
Yes.
what your response to me is going to be because of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So a good challenge, like answer with what book you just read recently that's interesting.
Yeah. And
Answer with,
also a place for conversation and real connection. Like, do we really care what everybody does? Not really. Like,
no,
if I met you and didn't know what you did and we started talking about it, I would be so much more interested in who you're working with and how they're improving on the things that they're improving, as opposed to it being an evaluation of you. You know what
yeah,
I mean? Like, it's like,
yeah,
what is this? What is the result of this mean? And that part of it, just, it's like a stepping off point for a much more meaningful conversation.
opens the door.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me how some of you touched on briefly a little bit about some of your trauma that you went through, and then some of your river time. How did those come together to be doing the work that you're doing now with, maybe it's first responders, maybe it's military, other people
Mm-hmm.
dealing with trauma? how did those come together? I'm sure it was partly an evolution of your own experience, and then how you were connecting with other people within that scope.
Yeah, it's ongoing evolution. I
Yeah.
think we all teach what we most want to learn in essence. And so for me, I had a couple signature events. My mom had a traumatic brain injury when I was 9. My parents got divorced. My dad was dealing with alcoholism, really, really sweet, kind drinker, loving man who ended up taking his own life when I was 15. So those two um, quickly shared traumas that I processed in my formative years. Luckily, I had the resources of the outdoors and nature and found friends that were disrupting and getting outside and climbing and living in vans and running rivers all over the world. And I was like, that's for me. I don't want to play the game of, you know, part of my dad's struggle was money. And I was like, I want to figure out how to not need it that badly
Yeah.
and not play the game of the 2.5 kids and the golden retriever and the, all of the stuff that at that time I wanted to find some different resources to create more stability in myself. And that's what I was drawn to in the outdoor communities that I found. So through my 20s, I was a wilderness EMT in the winters and a river guide in the summers. I took my river work into river advocacy, worked with like 28 different watersheds, traveling in my pickup truck, living in teepees between that, like going down to Chile and Patagonia and just like living this stoked river life and really challenging my skills and my edge. And so during those experiences, I started paying attention to risk, reward, trauma. On the ambulance, I would help people with pain and fear with breathing. It was just obvious. And then on the river, breath holding is a big part of having a kayak role in dealing with being pinned or being underwater. And I noticed this relationship between breathing and the sense of time or control that I would have in my experience.
Mhm.
So chicken and egg, right? If I'm super anxious, I'm not going to
Right.
be breathing as well, not performing as well, not as safe on the river. And if I could dial things down regulate, breathe well, this wasn't fully formulated, but I had studied a lot of physiology to become a wilderness EMT and was just starting to pay a lot of attention to how breath was interacting with both acute injury and trauma and performance. So about 22 years ago, I shifted away from the trauma emergency medicine field and went into prevention. Like, I'm
Mhm.
more interested in healing arts, started to want to unpack more of my own crap. And I found my teacher, and her name was Deborah Cohen. I'd also worked with Paige Robinson growing up, who's a yogi that highly influenced and planted some seeds for me. So I studied advanced yoga, advanced pranayama, yoga breathing, and then I continued for the last 20 plus years to explore embodied movement for trauma, integrative nutrition, neurosomatic intelligence, all kinds of tools that could direct your response instead of talk therapy and medication. So I know I'm sharing a lot, but the last piece of this is that,
This is what it's for. This is
okay,
what we do.
ramble on, sister. The career development really worked out well for me because I had the opportunity to find my work here in the Roaring Fork Valley where I live. And this organization, Challenge Aspen, started, with the global war on terror, started seeing a lot of combat veterans applying to their adaptive sports camps. And I was a teacher there, teaching movement and breath. And then I was there as we designed this camo program, Challenge Aspen Military Ops, specifically for war veterans. And so from 2003 until right before COVID, I was doing year-round work, up to 25 retreats a year with all combat veterans. Sometimes partners, spouses would come. And I developed the approach that I use now towards PTSD and trauma, using those intrinsic skills like breathing and movement and nervous system regulation to help people disrupt the moral failing of anxiety, depression, biphasic states, tune into their bodies as the instrument respect that their brain's triggers are that's what the brain does. It's not a personality thing. It's not a willpower thing. Like if you have a reaction to the sound of cans dropping in the grocery store and you had that same reaction in Afghanistan from a bomb exploding, your brain is working in the grocery store.
Yeah.
That's a working brain. If you don't want that response anymore, I got really interested in how to work with these tools and nature and movement to start to change the conditioned stimulus response pattern and create more agency in how our behavioral health patterns, basically. So I worked in a neurology clinic for quite some time, and right before COVID, I met Brian McKenzie, and we had one of those conversations that we just both were like, well, we should be working together. We at least need to meet up. And that journey began around 2020 is when I joined Shift.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. That's a perfect time right now. Let's talk more about Shift. What it is, if it has a specific mission, like just talk more about it.
Yeah, so shiftadapt.com, that's our company, and it used to be Power Speed Endurance through Brian McKenzie, and it's evolved, as does he, all the time. We share that in common. We both are disruptors who enjoy innovation and learning, lifelong learning, and testing what we're learning. So Shift is all about helping people expand their experience through understanding and interacting with their stress physiology, among other things. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Or can we get you to participate with the brilliance of your own body and breath and mind to take more agency over your stress response and see stress as a real evolutionary tool? It's not something to mitigate. It's something to engage with. Brian's work has been really high level and keeps pushing that level in the performance arena and looking at the metabolic systems and how to recruit things like breathing and many other testing tools to improve aerobic efficiency and metabolic health. And then how that fits in with my work with the nervous system and looking at your patterns of behavior and how can you read what's going on without judgment to then regulate and then start to reinforce new behavior patterns to optimize healing and performance. So together we have kind of a yin yang going on here of like, body, mind. So Shift has a membership that's monthly, and it's Brian McKenzie's daily training every single day. You just train like Brian. He creates custom programming every day. It's different every single day. And then I'm developing a Breathe Move program that we have the foundations of, where people can come learn some basic yoga and some progressions through pranayama breathing. So we're both really aligned that this whole protocols as prescriptions, not okay. People really deserve to understand how breath works in their own bodies, learn the principles, not the methods, and start a relationship with breathing that can be incredibly effective if it's taught right.
And some of the power of that, like I love what you said right there, like protocols and prescriptions. It's like it takes you out of that equation almost.
Yeah.
Learning these techniques and understanding how they relate to you so you can adapt and include things, and thus it gives you the license to grow and progress. There isn't right and wrong. It's how do I continually learn how this relates to me and maybe some of the responses I'm getting from different stimuli so I can continue to progress and add to this.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there's a danger to learning protocols that are prescriptive when everybody's body responds differently. And in some cases, they're contraindications, or you might have a certain sensitivity or an underdeveloped breath mechanic wave, and you're going to get a negative response from a breath protocol that another person is prescribing for downregulation. It might upregulate and create anxiety. In even just extending the exhales could do that if it's not done with some principles and understanding of certain individual mechanical limitations or obstructions in the nasal airway and the tissue, deviated septums, allergies. There's so many things that it's just it's Shift. We're really backing up to say, here's the foundation so that you can interact skillfully with your own brilliant body. We're not here to tell you how to live, how often to do anything. This is the principle. And here are some practices for you to start learning about yourself.
Yeah. And it also, again, keeps you in tune with your own progress, because your response, again, whether it's your own experience or at that point of physical limitation, whether it's based within your actual cardio base itself, and you go, oh, I can't do that. If we tell ourselves that, and then you're progressing, and then 6 weeks, 12 weeks down the line, you would have a different response, but you've already told yourself and imprinted that, oh, I can't do that. You know, some of it is you're telling yourself what you can't do and not keeping in tune with where am I right now?
Right.
And so I can keep really evaluating and learning to continue to progress.
Right. Love that. Yeah, it's going to change if you're paying attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And not waiting for somebody else to tell you. That's why I say to my clients all the time, like, this is a collaboration. I'm not going to tell you what you can and cannot do. We're going to talk about these things, track the appropriate amount of data that we can, and then discuss what the outcomes are. Like
Love it.
I'll tell them repeatedly, you're going to come to me with a question, and almost my response 9 times out of 10 is going to be, well, what do you think? Because
Nice.
I guarantee you are already creating the answer to this question by the things that you're taking in and experiencing. And if you can vocalize that, and then we can expand on that, you're going to be so much more powerful to yourself, because you're going to continually be paying attention and tracking those things so much more, as opposed to, well, Greg's going to tell me what the answer is.
Yeah, right. That's
I don't have the answers for you.
All education could follow more in that more natural way of learning. Why teach somebody something they already know if you haven't asked them what they think already?
Right.
It's brilliant.
Right.
Love that.
I mean,
I'm
it's
hoping you
just,
can teach me to surf better. I can come
oh
entertain
man,
you.
that's that circling back on like what you talked about before with some of the things that you're working with first responders and military, that work that I've done where I've been with ex-military, and then they're coming and they're part of a program, and we're teaching them to surf. Surfing, of course, is just the mechanism to be part of the water, right? The water connection. And what was so powerful about them, and there's so many things this could almost be a completely different podcast. We could just talk about this. But what I found to be so powerful about that was these warriors that were coming, that were highly trained. One of the programs I was involved with, these were active duty special forces. So they were all still active. They were so highly trained, so specialized. Physically, they were at just such top level. But except for one that was a Navy SEAL that had pretty extensive ocean experience and knowledge, most of them had very little. They all have some exposure, but the ocean is still somewhat foreign. And the ocean energy interacting on a board was foreign to everybody but that
Wow, that
one
must have
Navy
been
SEAL.
awesome.
It was. It's almost impossible to put into words, but to make it really short and precise is the trust that was built instantly, where I came with, like, ocean is something that I've had in my life my whole life. I have a lot of experience with it, and a lot of humility. It's like I'm always paying attention. You have to be that way.
Yeah.
And so coming from this way where they're active military, and not to overgeneralize, but you're in military, you're in structure, you're at this very high level elite. They interact in very small groups, and then they're coming to this place where the beach culture and the surf culture is much more open and free flowing. But then you connected instantly, and the trust that was built instantly, like, oh, this group of people, and Greg's as well, knows what he's talking about with this. Their defense is really came down. And
Mm.
that experience, to be able to be with them for a week and
Hmm.
be part of them and their first wave, I mean,
Love it. That's
I'll
awesome.
drop everything I can to do that at any point. If
Yeah.
I ever get the opportunity to do that, it's just, it feeds something in us that is very, very hard to get other places. It's just
Mm.
really, really powerful.
Yeah. That sounds like great work. What an
It's,
opportunity.
it's,
So there
I
it
wish
is.
I
You
could do
teach what
that.
you know
I
so
couldn't do
very.
it every week. Physically couldn't do it every week,
Yeah.
but man, I would love to do that way more often.
Yeah, well, you're speaking my language. That's what we did at Camo all the time is we do these adaptive sports camps that similar to your surfing experience, there's something real like the
Yeah.
mountain or the river, or we do archery camps with them with my archery mentor who's a Green Beret. We would do these outdoor experiences that are real. They require attention. And
Yeah.
so there's no buy-in needed. It's like you're going to hurt yourself. And that's the language that especially our SOCOM groups, all of our
Yeah.
military groups speak.
Yeah.
And they're very highly trained and even selected for specialization in taking risks. So they
Yeah.
know how to pay attention in a way that's a privilege to work with. And
Yeah.
then when you've got a doorway through sports and nature outside to engage all of these systems in the body, and you get out of the talk therapy model, which certainly has a place, no
Yeah.
disrespect to that at all, but to integrate that with this kind of work where you're together taking risks. It's called rec therapy, but it's not. I mean, there's so much more than that. It's like
Right.
getting back to reality is how I always feel when I'm in those environments. And of
Yeah.
course, those of us involved on the facilitation side are the students.
Yeah.
We're just learning the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you had this experience too. Like these were week longs, 5 days or so, 5 to 7 days. And at the end, they're profusely thanking you for all of this experience. And you just want to go, I cannot tell you how much I get from these. And I guess that's really the nature of it. I mean, it's at the core is each of us feels like we got more than the other person. Like,
Yeah.
what a wonderful transaction that
Yeah,
is.
that is so wonderful and so rare in, raising kids and seeing the school system and what we do there versus this kind of learning and engagement. It's a totally different way to learn. So yeah, it's good to give back to those guys. They I always say, like, the whole career I've followed, it's a privilege to. Our country has its own messes, but we still, I believe, have the best idea out there. We can have conversations like this. We can challenge ideas, talk freely. And I always love to turn back and really appreciate and give whatever I've been able to learn is thanks to these men and women on the front lines that have protected me and protected our way of life and created the space to even have the debates we're having in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Emily, thank you so much for being on the Surf Song Show. It was a great time talking to you, and we could have you on multiple more times and still have more things to talk about. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really fun. Really good conversation.